Now we'll call up our second panel. Our second panel is composed of Mr. and Mrs. Mike and Chantell Sackett from Idaho, and they're putting out the name tags. Let's have to see where they place them out here for you. Damian Schiff, senior attorney with Pacific Legal Foundation. Mr. Dr. Dennis Fife, mayor of Brigham City, Utah. Mark Knight, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the Kansas Livestock Association. And Buster Johnson, the chairman of the Mojave County Board of Supervisors in Arizona. And as witnesses are finding their chairs, I will remind everybody we do have a full panel, and these issues are such that we like to get into a lot of questions and answers and discussion with you. Your written testimony will be made a part of the record, and we encourage you to remember to try to keep your time to 5 minutes. Now, since the clocks aren't working in front of you, if you get going a little long, I might just kind of give a little tap here to remind you to try to keep it to 5 minutes. I know that the 5 minutes is going to run out before you've run out of things you want to say to us, but we will get opportunities as we get into the questions and answers for you to clarify and expand upon your presentations. And with that, Mike and Chantell, between the two of you, you want to decide who goes first and how we're going to approach your testimony?
Mike will just read.
All right, Mike, please proceed.
Good morning. I'm Mike Sackett. This is my wife, Chantell. We are from Priest Lake, and we are grateful to be invited here today. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about regulatory abuse as we have experienced it firsthand. We welcome the chance to share our impression of how the regulatory abuse hurts individuals, families, communities, and the economy as a whole. We have told our story many times before, but it's worth giving the outline again, because it's a warning to all Americans that are at risk if regulators are allowed to do whatever they please with no accountability, regardless of the effect on people's lives, their rights, and on the economy. Environmental protection is an important cause, one we strongly believe in, but regulators need to be able to justify their actions both in the legal sense and in the environmental sense. They cannot be a law unto themselves. Our story is not complicated. We are small business owners. We've always wanted to live on the shores of Priest Lake, but we're not able to afford to buy waterfront property. When a small parcel became available 500 feet from the lake, we bought it for $23,000. We wanted to build a 3-bedroom house, and we had every reasonable expectation that this would be possible. The lot was purchased and is zoned in a residential subdivision. It includes a sewer hookup. There are houses on 2 adjacent lots and county roads on 2 sides. So we went to our local Bonner County and got the building permit checklist. We compiled the whole process. We were issued our building permit and we started working on our lot. But after we started laying gravel, 3 federal officials showed up without notice or warning of any kind, and they told us they thought that we were building on a wetland. There had to be some mistake, because there is no standing water on our land and no water flowing off of it, and we had all of our local building permits. The 3 federal officials had no paperwork of any kind, either to stop the work on our lot or any proof that our lot was in a wetland. What was also shocking was the way the EPA treated us. For 7 months, despite our repeated requests, they didn't send us anything in writing telling us what we had done wrong. And then we got issued the so-called compliance order. We were ordered to put the site back the way it was, plant wetlands plants that were not native to the site, and maintain the property for 3 to 5 years. The cost of complying would have been tens of thousands of dollars, but the cost of not complying is literally $75,000 a day, a terrifying threat. We knew that our land was not wetlands, and we wanted to make our case and get somebody to listen, but the EPA refused our request for a hearing. And the EPA and the Ninth Circuit said we cannot appeal directly to the court. We would first have to go through a long and expensive wetlands permit process and be denied. So this is why we are before the United States Supreme Court right now. The oral argument was held on January 9th. Damian Schiff, our attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation, asked the court to recognize that property owners have the right to appeal when EPA declares their land to be wetlands and takes over their land. Our case is about constitutional rights, but this panel today is about regulations and the economy. So here is something I would really like to share with you that is important. When EPA invaded our lives, it didn't just trample our plans of our home, and it isn't just robbing us of sleep and peace of mind by threatening us with unimaginable fines. It also deprived other small businesses an opportunity for honest work, from the people who would frame the walls, install the plumbing, the flooring, windows, roof, and heating, to the people who would have provided the materials. It has made it almost impossible for our small business to have any banking relationship due to the fines threatened by the EPA. We've had employees leave due to the threat of the EPA imposing these multi-million-dollar fines. Now, multiply our experience by hundreds, if not thousands per year. EPA issues thousands of wetlands compliance orders every year, and like us, the landowners cannot appeal them directly to court. So we don't know how many of these orders are based on real environmental facts or superficial, shoddy drive-by reviews, as in our case. In our case, EPA never did any testing on our property before ordering us to stop work and walk away from our dreams. At the oral argument, Justice Alito said this was outrageous, and we agree. While we can't know whether EPA's wetlands compliance orders are well-grounded, we do know that they stop people from using their property, and that destroys jobs. From what we can see based on our own experience, EPA has to be one of America's most efficient job-killing machines. One more thing. Since our case started getting national publicity, we have been hearing from people all across this great country that are caught in similar situations. They are under threat from EPA or other federal regulatory agencies, and they don't believe that they've done anything wrong. They can't afford to fight back against agencies with unlimited funds, and there are procedural obstacles in the way, as in our case. And these people are scared, and that's what we've heard over and over and over again, fear. So yes, Chantell and I are fighting for ourselves, but bigger than that we are fighting for everyone in this country who owns property, large or small. We believe property owners have the constitutional rights, and the EPA should not be able to get away with destroying people's lives, jobs, and economy while answering to nobody but itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantell and Mike. Dame, yes,
Chairman, could I say something out of order?
you may, Representative Labrador.
You know, I just got to know the Sacketts here very recently, just over the last year, and I am so impressed. And I think hopefully they will be successful in the Supreme Court, and if they are, I think years from now, we will be hearing about the Sacketts and their great effort. You know, I came up on a quote here recently from one of our founding fathers, one of our great patriots, says, "The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government, lest it come to dominate our lives and interests." That's Patrick Henry. And I think the fight that the Sacketts have engaged in is to remind us once again. Many of us ran for office saying that we wanted to stand up and defend the Constitution. They have actually done it, and I just want to thank them for what they have done in their fight.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Raul. And agreed. Damien.
Thank you, Senator, and other distinguished members of this panel for this opportunity to speak to you today about how we can protect the environment without endangering our economy. I am an attorney with Pacific Legal Foundation, which is a legal watchdog organization that fights for private property rights and a balanced approach to environmental regulation. Our caseload at PLF is heavy, unfortunately, because environmental regulations in this country are seriously out of balance. Time and again, environmental mandates are issued that undermine private property rights and therefore postpone economic recovery for all of us without any clear environmental benefit. Americans have become familiar with one outrageous case, that of Mike and Chantell Sackett, who are represented by attorneys at Pacific Legal Foundation in the U.S. Supreme Court. But the Sacketts are victims of abuse under the Clean Water Act, but other environmental statutes demand attention as well, including, as already been mentioned this morning, the Endangered Species Act. One misguided ESA crusade is well known, that of the draconian water restrictions that were imposed on California's San Joaquin Valley over these last several years. These cutbacks in 2009 and 2010 idled hundreds of thousands of otherwise fertile and productive farmland, contributed to extensive job losses and led to a 20% increase in water rates for Southern California water users. All of this was part of a scientifically questionable scheme to help the Delta smelt, a 3-inch fish in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta that has been declining for many years. A variety of factors have caused the decline, but regulators focused on one excuse, that is the water deliveries to California, to 2/3 of the people in California. Last year, a federal district court invalidated the biological opinion issued under the Endangered Species Act that led to these pumping cutbacks, and in fact, the judge blasted the Fish and Wildlife Service for using bad faith and sloppy science in imposing these water cutbacks and for ignoring the human element. The litigation, however, continues in that case, and the prospect for a regulatory drought in California remains very real. Some ESA abuses, though, flow just because the law itself is unfortunately vague. The criteria for listing species and designating critical habitat aren't clear, and that leads to a sloppy result. For instance, hundreds of miles up and down the Central Valley of California, the Valley elderberry longhorn beetle remains on the Endangered Species Act list, even though a 2006 Fish and Wildlife survey determined that it is no longer endangered and merits delisting. Because of the ESA protections for the beetle, landowners are blocked from using their property in productive ways, and water districts are complaining that it is harder to maintain the levees in California because of the ESA restrictions imposed because of the beetle's listing. Habitat designations under the ESA that are questionable put a damper on economic activity in many other states as well. For example, more than 700 miles of riverbed in Arizona and New Mexico have just been designated again as critical habitat for the spiked dace and loach minnow, even though regulators have failed to provide a scientific basis for this decision. They have not identified the physical or biological features that are essential to these fishes' conservation, and they have underestimated the economic impact of that designation. And as a result of this critical habitat designation, landowners in Arizona and New Mexico are at an increased risk of flooding. As the Coalition of Arizona and New Mexico Counties has explained, ranchers are impeded from maintaining and improving bridges and roads, as well as pumps and other flood control structures. The ESA's vague language about what constitutes a species is also a cause of regulatory mischief. For example, in Southern California, 200,000 acres of critical habitat has been designated for the coastal California gnatcatcher. The Fish and Wildlife Service estimates that the cost of that designation over the next 20 years approaches $1 billion. Recent biological studies, though, have determined that the gnatcatcher in California is, in a scientific sense, indistinguishable from the gnatcatcher in Mexico. Yet even though the species as a whole is thriving in Mexico, the Fish and Wildlife Service refuses to lift the listing in Southern California and free property owners to use their land in job-creating ways. Too often, even where the ESA is crystal clear in its mandates, federal regulators fail to comply. For example, the ESA requires that the Fish and Wildlife Service conduct a review every 5 years of every species listed to determine whether, in fact, that listing is still appropriate. One high-profile example, which has already been discussed this morning, is the gray wolf. Remarkably, the gray wolf has been protected under the ESA for decades, but the service had failed to conduct any of the required scientific reviews to determine whether the listing of the gray wolf in any part of its range is still merited. The service did not begin that review process until Pacific Legal Foundation filed a successful lawsuit in Washington last year that has settled and has resulted in the promise that that long overdue review will be completed and published. These are the kinds of issues that my organization deals with every day: environmental regulations that ignore the law, bend it, or push vague statutory language to the limit, leaving dramatic economic impacts with very few environmental benefits. The need for reform is great, for more balance and concern for a healthy economic environment, as well as for more scientific rigor to make sure that when we do attempt to protect the environment, we do it in an efficient way without harming the constitutional rights of private property owners throughout this country. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Mayor Fife.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I appreciate your concern over these issues and matters. My purpose in testifying today is to make you aware that the EPA, in our case, made an arbitrary regulatory action that, in my opinion, belittles the process and demonstrates that while the EPA says it takes comments, it just goes through the motions to impose its will regardless of the science. Let me first give you a background on the issues that we faced that has had a significant impact on our economic development over the last few years. On September 21st, 2006, the EPA promulgated revisions to the National Ambient Air Quality Standards of ppm 2.5 particulate matter. It retained the primary annual standard. However, it lowered the 24-hour standard from a level of 65 to 35 micrograms per cubic meter. States were required to designate the areas in not later than a year as being attained or non-attained or unclassifiable. The Clean Air Act requires a designation of non-attainment for any area that does not meet those standards or an area that contributes to the air quality in a nearby area that does not meet those standards. And that's the issue that we faced. In Utah, ambient PM 2.5 data collected over the past years shows that the 24-hour standard has never been violated in the states throughout the whole state. I'm sorry, the annual standard has never been violated, but with the new 24-hour standard, much of the urbanized monitored area did violate the standard. The monitoring data collected suggests a couple of important things to keep in mind. First, the data shows that it is a seasonal problem characterized by periods of high concentrations of fine particulate that consist mostly of secondary particulate. The formation of these secondary particulates is driven by wintertime temperature inversions which trap the air in urbanized areas. The mix of emissions associated with the urbanized areas reacts very quickly under these conditions to produce spikes of concentration of the fine particulates. Second, under these conditions, the observed concentrations are fairly uniform throughout the entire urbanized area. The data clearly highlights the distinction between urban and rural areas. Much of this phenomenon is also due to the fact that the population is generally located within the lowland valley areas in which the area is easily trapped by the temperature inversions. The vast majority of Utah is sparsely populated. Box Elder County is larger than the states of Rhode Island, Delaware, Connecticut, and Hawaii, but the population is less than 50,000 people, of which 35% live in Brigham City. Brigham City is located approximately 60 miles north of Salt Lake and is the largest city in Box Elder County. Most of the monitoring data in Utah has been collected in the urbanized portions of the state. There is only one air quality monitor in all of Box Elder County, and that is located in Brigham City behind McDonald's on Main Street. The monitor in Brigham City has never shown a violation of the new standard during the period evaluated by the EPA. But based on the examination of all data identified by the EPA, the state of Utah recommended that Box Elder County be designated as an attainment area. However, in December 2009, EPA designated a portion of Box Elder County as non-attainment. The designation area included Brigham City and two smaller communities to the south of Brigham City, then jogged out 30 miles to the west, taking in an uninhabited portion of the county to include ATK's rocket manufacturing facility, for which no data existed at all. Even with the employee reductions resulting from the change in the space program, ATK has approximately 1,500 employees in Box Elder County. Just a few years ago, that was over 3,500. We invited the Region 8 EPA Air Program Director and some of the staff members to visit the area and discuss the issue. They were taken on a flight over portions of Box Elder County designated as non-attainment to illustrate the topography and the interaction with the urbanized Wasatch Front. The topography is quite unique, which results in much different weather patterns than the Salt Lake area. For example, the Wasatch Front was recently designated as a disaster area with winds that exceeded hurricane strength. But during the event, Brigham City had much reduced winds and received no damage whatsoever. We asked the EPA representative how they came to the conclusion to designate a portion of Box Elder County as non-attainment. They stated that their model showed that pollution from Brigham City contributes to those areas south of Brigham City and do not meet the new standards, We all laughed and said, you need to be here on one of those inversion days. Anyone can tell you that it's just the opposite. You can watch the haze from the front move up from the Salt Lake area. We asked what wind data they used, and they said they only had the Salt Lake Airport data and Pocatello, Idaho data. It was apparent that the model was flawed and the data did not represent the real situation. We suggested that we had wind, temperature, and barometer data right at our local airport. We were told that they couldn't use that data because it wasn't certified by the EPA. It was also suggested that they use data from Hill Air Force Base. They looked at it and verified our statements. However, again, they ignored the data. I asked that they take box elder data out of the model and see how it affected the pollution levels in the Salt Lake area. I was told that it made no difference because it was much lower than any other probable contributors to the pollution problems in the Salt Lake area. In conclusion, let me summarize 3 points. In reaching the conclusion that Brigham City and a portion of Box Elder was designated as a non-attainment air quality area, the EPA used data that was too limited and too far removed from Box Elder to provide an accurate assessment. When the state of Utah and others called this fact to the EPA's attention and pointed out the windrows data of the Hill Air Force Base showed the winds moved in exactly the opposite direction from what the EPA concluded by their modeling, the new and more reliable data was essentially ignored, and they retained their prior conclusion that Box Elder was contributing to the PM 2.5 pollution in Salt Lake. EPA seemed to justify its predetermined result, even if that meant applying different standards to different areas of the county. As stated before, Box Elder is a very large county with a very small population. As support for its conclusions that there were emissions coming from Box Elder to Salt Lake, EPA contends that a large percentage of the population commutes to the Salt Lake area. EPA has distorted the significance of auto emissions issued that they commute. We only commute probably 300 to 400 cars at most, compared to hundreds of thousands or millions in the Salt Lake area. There are actually many that commute from Salt Lake to Box Elder County to work at ATK, Nucor, and Procter & Gamble. It is interesting to note that the population density of Salt Lake County is 1,396 persons per square mile, while Box Elder County is 8 persons per square mile. The problem along the Wasatch Front is not a function of what is happening in Box Elder County. Box Elder is a rural area which in its own right is an attainment area. The science does not support that pollutants from Box Elder County find their way to Salt Lake, but it does show that pollution from Salt Lake County does impact Box Elder County. The data shows that Box Elder mimics the Salt Lake data on the inversion days, but at a much lower level as the Salt Lake pollution reaches Box Elder County. Box Elder and the state of Utah and their experts, people who live and breathe here, know which way the wind blows. I guess because the EPA says so, the winds always blow favorably in the EPA's direction. Imposing the non-attainment designation on our rural area that is trying to stimulate growth, attract new businesses, keep old businesses, and otherwise survive in this economy is simply unfair. In 2009, after 40 years, Procter & Gamble built the first plant in the United States in Box Elder County. I asked the plant manager who helped pick the site if it would have made a difference in selecting their site in Box Elder had it been designated as a non-attainment area for air quality. He indicated that it would have been a major factor in making their decision. By including ATK in the non-attainment area without any justification, it appears that the EPA is against business and jobs. Our major employers are very conscious about the environment and our air quality. In summary, it appears the EPA, having been challenged and shown to be wrong, is unwilling to take any of the new wind data into account and make adjustments to their flawed modeling. Rather, the EPA comes across as acting like a bully, unflinching in its intention to impose its will while giving lip service to scientifically sound evidence that contradicts its view. Again, regardless of the science and facts, EPA's modeling dictates the way the wind blows. Just because EPA says the wind blows in a certain direction doesn't necessarily make it so. However, it is difficult to refute the EPA even in the court systems because the courts have a history of deferring to the EPA as the experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Johnson.
Honorable caucus members, should have a map to give you an idea that they've passed out. I am Buster Johnson, the chairman of the Mojave County Board of Supervisors in Arizona and the co-chair of the Arizona-Utah Local Economic Coalition. All these counties and towns are directly affected by uranium exploration, mining and milling, and therefore tremendously negatively impacted by the Department of Interior's recent withdrawal of 1 million acres of the country's richest uranium resource. You'll note on the northern Arizona land status map that the withdrawal area, the 3 parcels outlined in red, sits in a virtual sea of federal lands, which are already closed to mining. In fact, the Arizona Strip, the area lying between the Utah border south of the Grand Canyon, contains less than 1% of privately owned lands, and federal ownership in most of the surrounding counties averages 80% or more. The federal government's control over the region's land has forced the residents to rely on tourist-based jobs, which are tied to the area's numerous natural parks, BLM areas, etc., and has resulted in low-paying, seasonal employment and a resulting unemployment rate of 18%, and an annual wage of $22,000 to $26,000, which is far below the $41,000 nationally. These figures don't include the rates of the nearby Native American tribes. Tribal members of the Navajo Nation have a current unemployment rate of 50% and an annual per capita income of $7,100. A prime example of the economic health of the communities at schools, Kane County School District in Utah borders the Arizona Strip, where 8 uranium deposits were mined on BLM lands during the 1980s and mid-90s, and the timber industry also thrived on U.S. Forest Service lands. Shortly after the uranium and timber industry shut down, the student population started dropping and went from a high of 1,459 students to 1,175, a drop of 284 students. Now, that loss translates into a revenue loss of $2.8 million a year. That's not only the school system, but the general economy. The impact has been significant. Teaching positions and programs were eliminated, schools shrank to 2 to 3 students per grade level, drastically affecting their educational opportunities, and secondary school closed, forced students to be transferred many miles into Arizona. And Arizona schools have had the same devastation. The Fredonia School District has dropped 50% since the mines have closed. There are many personal stories I could relate to you, but I will sum it up with the fact that Kane County's suicide rate is now 4 times the national average. Their number of adults 20 to 29 years of age is 45% lower than the state average, and those 30 to 39 is 30% lower. These numbers are indicative of the death of our area with the removal of employment opportunities. Despite the claims of uranium mining opponents that tourism has and will continue to be the bedrock of the region's economy, restaurants, hotel, retail businesses all continue to close, and our young people are moving to rural, metropolitan areas for employment. The Obama administration insistence that uranium mining will harm the Grand Canyon ecosystem, thereby ruining the region's tourism-based economy, is pure fear-mongering and totally ignores uranium mining's track record in the area. The reality is that during the 10-year period from 1981 to 90, while uranium mining was in full swing in northern Arizona, visitation doubled to the Grand Canyon from 2 to 4 million visitors. During this time, safe, environmentally friendly mining occurred with little or no notice by visitors to nearby attractions on federal land. Exactly what is the administration forcing these local communities to give up by shoving the northern Arizona withdrawal down our collective throats? In our impact study, over a 40-year period, there's over 1,000 new jobs created just for the mining. With a $40 million annual payroll, almost $30 billion in output, $2 billion in federal and state corporate income, $168 million in state severance taxes, and $9.5 million in mining claim payments and fees to local governments. I have worked to develop a coalition of local support to assist you in Congress by putting together a coalition of counties and towns from Arizona and Utah. How will this help you? It lets you know that we are real people. We are fairly politically savvy, and that every new job created in our sparse part of the county is worth 10 times to us what one job created in the big city is worth. I believe the examples I've just shared emphasize that point. Together with my elected colleagues, we have put together a well-thought-out plan which will, we believe, ultimately bring us success. Success for us is fully revoking the Salazar withdrawal. Each of you, like us, no doubt is offended to know that with one single misuse of executive branch authority, in this case the withdrawal itself, overturns the express will of Congress, which by law and in the Constitution itself granted authority expressly to Congress, the legislative branch, over how federal government-owned lands should be used. On behalf of all my local government colleagues in Arizona and Utah, I urge you to make this Obama administration action a short-term detour, not a permanent edict. Here's our plan to overturn it, which requires your continued support. First, local governments in Arizona and Utah intend to file legal action shortly challenging the administration's failure to coordinate with us. Likewise, the aggrieved companies intend to file their lawsuits. Meanwhile, our leaders here in Congress, Senators McCain, Hatch, Kyle, Lee, Murkowski, Barrasso, and Alexander, along with House Natural Resources Committee Chairman Hastings, Subcommittee Chairman Bishop, Arizonans Frank, Gosar, Flake, Quayle, and Swiker, Utahns, Chaffez and Madison, and dozens of all of you are looking for legislative opportunities to overturn the Obama-Salazar Arizona withdrawal. We'll continue working on that objective until this wrong is righted and the crucial and environmentally justified mining is allowed to go forward as was envisioned. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Knight.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. On behalf of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the Kansas Livestock Association about the issues facing agriculture when dealing with the federal government's regulatory regime. My name is Mark Knight, and I raise livestock and multiple crops in Lyons, Kansas. The United States cattle industry has set the bar for the rest of the world in terms of environmental protection. A recent study by Dr. Judith Capers showed that from 1977 to 2007, the U.S. beef industry has greatly improved on almost every environmental front. We use less land, we use less cattle, and less water to produce the same amount of beef. Our industry has made an overall reduction in our carbon footprint of 16.3%. We are improving and will continue to improve. But in order for the United States to continue to set the bar for environmental stewardship, there must also be a business environment that allows American farmers and ranchers to operate. The current one is unsustainable, and one of the major factors is the regulatory burdens and the uncertainty. Like death by 1,000 cuts, each regulation adds cost to my operation, eventually bleeding us to death. Consider the following examples. First, the EPA's current national ambient air quality standard for coarse particulate matter, also known as dust. If EPA lowers the dust standards now or in the future, it would be extremely burdensome to our state's economy, not to mention our operations. While we're encouraged by the administrator's promise to propose to retain the current standard, we need permanent certainty. We applaud Representatives Noam Pierce and all their colleagues for passing the Farm Dust Regulation Prevention Act and strongly encourage the Senate to follow suit. My second example, EPA's Clean Water Act, Section 308 CAFO reporting rule that was proposed in October of last year. EPA's proposed rule would require owners and operators of CAFOs to report a laundry list of information to the agency, including the address of my feed yard. EPA intends to require producers to upload this information to its website, where it will be displayed for the entire world, including animal rights extremists and possibly terrorists. This rule puts my own family at risk. My house is just a few hundred feet away from our operation, our feed yard operation. And that, you know, so if there's any acts of terrorism or harassment occurring due to the feed yard and where the feed yard's located, it's also right near my home, near my family. It seems EPA, though, would rather negotiate with environmentalists and put our food system in jeopardy than to come to the table with industry and truly work with us in solving any direct environmental concerns. My third example is very close to home as well. The Flint Hills region of Kansas is the last large expanse of unplowed tallgrass prairie in North America. Prescribed burning is used by private ranchers as a predominant management tool to improve rangeland productivity. It is also used by private conservation groups, and federal agency is a key ecological management tool to preserve and maintain the prairie habitat. When the Kansas Department of Health and Environment expressed concern over high particulates and ozone levels due to the prescribed burning in the Flint Hills, the agriculture community came together and developed the Flint Hills Smoke Management Plan. This plan demonstrates that if there are concerns, agriculture is willing to sit down and help address them. At this time, I want to thank Senator Moran for continuing to push this solution to make it a permanent solution. The Flint Hills Preservation Act recognizes the unique challenge in the Flint Hills and will bring some common sense to the federal air policies so we can effectively manage these native grasslands. Unfortunately, the list of harmful regulation bleeding agriculture to death goes on and on, including greenhouse gas regulations, Superfund reporting requirements, numeric nutrient criteria, emissions requirements for large engines. I'm going to hit on that for just a second. We're also in trucking operations as well. One example, when the new engine came out for one of our feed trucks at the feed yard, it was in the shop 13 times that first year, and the cost is on us. Even though there's warranties, it's still downtime, and I'm sure you all know that cattle need fed at the same time every day, and it needs to be accurate. In another trucking operation, we bought 3 brand new semi-trucks, and every one of them has already been within 8,000 miles, has already been in the shop for 2.5 at least to 3 weeks, and all because they're not quite sure how to diagnose the problem, and if they do diagnose the problem accurately, the parts have to be shipped from somewhere in this country. That's what the EPA has done as far as the efficiency of our operations just in that side. When I was on the Governor Sebelius's KEEP board, I brought that up to the entire group as well. Obviously, she's not there and the program is done. I'll just keep on going. The Endangered Species Act regulations, Department of Labor regulations, livestock marketing regulations, and outdated transportation regulations. The estate tax is pretty big. Big time deal there on that estate tax. Because of the volume and weight of regulation has increased so dramatically over the last 10 years, many operations like my own are no longer able to complete all the compliance paperwork with just one employee. This adds cost to our operations without improving productivity, and much of the time gives no additional environmental protection whatsoever. I know a case where a feed yard operator was fined by EPA for not putting a 0 in the operational log on days it did not rain. Another instance where the operator was fined because he didn't mark the box that the ground was thawed when nutrients were applied, even though it was in August. We have bigger problems to worry about if the ground in Kansas is still frozen in August. Washington might think that this is regulatory job creation, but what it really does is prevent investment and expansion, which would create jobs. When presented with the opportunity to buy another local feed yard, my family, we turned it down. Senator Roberts was right. I'm tired of it. And we turned that down because we just didn't feel like we had any energy left to indulge in what would be more and more regulatory headaches. Farmers and ranchers pride themselves as being the primary stewards of our natural resources because we want to be able to pass our operations on down to our children. It is my hope that today's discussion will help facilitate a more productive relationship between regulators and producers, and that we can work together to solve America's environmental challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knight. We appreciate all our panelists. We have a couple of our members who have got some urgencies to move on with, and so we're going to go quickly first to Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Sackett, it's hard to believe that you have to go through what you've gone through. We really appreciate the Pacific Legal Foundation and what you've been doing to try and protect us from these outrageous approaches towards not just the environment, but in so many other ways as well. I'm going to get to you, Mayor, in just a second. We're grateful to all of you. Let me just talk about our mayor. Mayor, just so everybody understands your credentials, you were a professor of chemistry at the Air Force Academy for a long time. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, I'm a retired Air Force officer, and I was a emeritus tenured professor, deputy head of the chemistry department at the United States Air Force Academy, and then I've also taught at Utah State University. I managed ATK's lab, chemistry labs for 16 years, and also solved many problems for NASA.
You're pretty outraged at the approach they've taken to your community, aren't you?
Yes, I actually looked into the data and how the analysis of the filters and so forth to see the point sources and all of those types of issues. So it really was very upsetting to see how the EPA handled this situation.
It's just arbitrary. It's what they're doing. Let me just say this. You also pointed out that the non-attainment is seasonal to wintertime inversions, which occur uniformly throughout the urban areas. Do I understand your testimony correctly that this uniformity is evidence that your region, which is outside these urban areas, could not be contributing to that non-attainment status? Could you just explain that to us?
Well, actually, we also joined in a lawsuit against the EPA with ATK to support ATK in that, and we just found out Friday that after 2 years, we originally filed in Denver at the district court there, and then after a year, the EPA was able to get a venue change to the Washington, D.C. court, which would be more favorable to the EPA. It turns out that the way it was ruled is the EPA just had to show any contribution to the area, so even if they could show one car commuted to the Salt Lake area, that was sufficient. They didn't have to show how much contributed, just that there was a contribution to the area. I think if you added up all the cars in Box Elder County, it would make no impact in the actual number rounded off for the pollution in the Salt Lake area. So it's just not possible that we could contribute in that vein that the EPA has said.
According to the monitoring data, Box Elder County was within compliance with the EPA standards. However, EPA chose to change the boundaries of an existing non-attainment area to include your county.
Yes.
Can you help us explain the rationale for this decision by the EPA, and what was the science behind their decision?
Well, the Clean Air Act says that if you contribute to a non-attainment area, then you can be designated as non-attainment. And so their approach is that we contributed to the Salt Lake area, and as I mentioned, in terms of even a car commuting down there. But the wind directions and so forth shows, as I said, that Salt Lake is what contributes to Box Elder County and not to that area.
Well, I'd like to make sure
Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think so, unless you want to give more. But I want to, let me just make sure of this one point for the record. Utah's Department of Air Quality stated very clearly that there was no scientific backing for the EPA, including Box Elder, into the non-attainment area. And under normal circumstances, what is the state's role in this type of decision?
The state said that they did not want Box Elder County to be designated as non-attainment. In fact, I worked with the DEQ in the state in going over some of these statements, and they agreed entirely with the statement. And they tried to get the EPA to do different modeling, understand that their modeling was flawed, and tried to explain, let's use our model. But the EPA says, well, this is the model that we use everywhere in the whole nation, but it just didn't apply to the way the topography was and the mountains there in the Wasatch Front.
Well, so what we see here is the EPA breaking two very important principles. First, the EPA ignores the proper role of the state agency that should be given primacy in this decision. And secondly, the EPA ignores all the available science related to that decision.
Absolutely.
Now, could you just tell us a little bit more about what this action by EPA will mean to Brigham City, a town of around 18,000 people?
Well, we have several projects that we're trying to recruit right now, and it is a big issue for them to see that we are in a non-attainment area. I tried to use the example of Procter & Gamble. Luckily, they came in before this happened, but they are a very green company, very cognizant of the air quality and other issues in the environment. And when a company we're trying to recruit to come in, looks at that we're in a non-attainment for air quality, it just is a drastic decision on their part to say, oh, do we want to have our employees and our company in a non-attainment area for poor air quality, when indeed we have no poor air quality.
Well, Dr. Fife, we're really happy to have you here today, and as a mayor, I want to congratulate you for the good job you're doing there. I want to thank my colleagues for allowing me to go out of order because of my schedule, and I just appreciate all our House members and Senate members here today. This shows that we in the West are getting pretty doggone fed up with what's going on back here, and frankly out there as well. But we appreciate you taking time, every one of you,
Thank you.
come and help us to understand this better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hatch. And Representative Gosar.
Well, thank you for allowing me to go out of order as well, Chairman. Supervisor Johnson, I really want to thank you for being here today and to briefly discuss what's going on in northern Arizona, from our forests to our mining industry. You're exactly right. The environmentally responsible development of Americans' vast energy and mineral resources in the Arizona Strip will expand our domestic energy supply, create new high-paying jobs, and lessen our dependence on foreign energy and minerals, and generate revenue for federal and state treasuries. In fact, right now, we are actually importing 95% of our uranium into this country. In your testimony, you mentioned that a recent study estimated that the withdrawal will stifle the creation of over 1,000 high-paying jobs, creating $29.4 billion in economic output, $2 billion in federal and state corporate income taxes, and many other direct economic benefits. This is just direct benefits, right? Based off your experience, what type of multiplier effect does just one mining project have for our communities?
Basically, with the jobs, it's very conservative to say a four multiplier would be very conservative. And as far as the money goes, these people are the salt of the earth, just much like the ranchers and everybody else who are up here. These are people who take their money, spend it in their community. They're buying cars, they're going to the grocery store, they're buying drywall. This money is put back in. These aren't silicone chip people who are taking their money and hiding it offshore. These people generate a vast amount of money into the community.
So let's go back through that testimony again. When you when multiple projects were operating in the Arizona Strip in the 80s, did anyone even notice? Was tourism negatively affected? Was northern Arizona less habitable?
No, it actually increased up there because of, at that time, like I said, they doubled the visitation to the Grand Canyon. So if anything, it was increased because we had more miners working out there who I'm just guessing, had more family members come in who took advantage of the resources that are around us. So
the tourism industry was actually, and the regional economy was actually much stronger, enhanced, right?
Yes, it was enhanced with the mining.
You visited Arizona's one mine, currently operational in Fredonia, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
So much of the technology has changed in the last 20 to 30 years. The environmental footprint is minimal and the process is very safe, correct?
Yes.
These are very minimal. In your mind, the administration's withdrawal is completely unnecessary and undermines the economic viability of northern Arizona.
Yes, and I think it perpetuates a fraud on the people by saying that the Grand Canyon itself is going to be harmed when these mines are miles away from even the Grand Canyon buffer area. The area now is only 15 acres is all it is. These aren't open pit mines like we would have seen in the past. These are breccia pipes, which are very small, contained. The rock is taken out. It's transported in a covered truck to Utah where the tailings and everything are processed. The used rock is brought back and placed in the same hole, so the contamination is pretty much zero.
Yeah, I've been there and very impressed. I'd like to expand beyond the mining ban and discuss other land management issues that threaten northern Arizona's region. There's quite a bit of federally administrated land and the resources in our region, correct?
Yes, Mojave County is 13,500 square miles. Over 90% of our land is federal or state.
The administration says it's taking actions like the mining ban to protect our tourism economy, but they're actually prohibiting economic development and threatening existing tourism in your area. You're from Lake Havasu City. Can you talk a little bit about the struggles on Lake Havasu, a large reservoir behind the Parker Dam, Colorado River, that attracts over 3 million visitors a year and serves as a major economic engine in your area? What type of federal red tape restricts economic activity there?
Well, it's once again, we have every alphabet in the world there. We have the Bureau of Reclamation, we have Fish and Game, BLM is on the land. Anybody you can imagine shows up there. Anytime you want to get a permit, you have the Corps of Engineers you have to go through. If you want to put an anchor on the floor, you have to have the Corps of Engineers permit. If you want to do any kind of dredging to try to get an area that's safe for the people to go into, you have to go through 4 or 5 agencies, except when it comes to trying to get some help, and then there's no agency that's in charge that can oversee the rest of them. They all ignore you when you ask to put together a panel and say we'll do it. And even as far as going from the lake issue, our BLM land surrounds Lake Havasu, which is a tremendous tourism draw for us because people come from California, Nevada, and everywhere to four-wheel and enjoy the beautiful desert. They're hikers, there's four-wheel drive people, there's horseback people. They're shutting those areas down to our people now, the trails. And then they go, well, we're only shutting part down. Yeah, they shut down the part where you get on, so you can't get to the part that's open, so your people can't go out and enjoy it. So there's just, the regulations put on by the federal government, and you had some people talking about the quagmire mussels and those things before, it is almost impossible that our area, which is the highest tourism area for a water body in Arizona, is starting to go down just because of the regulations.
The National Park Service is also developing deeply flawed regulations that threaten the Grand Canyon air tours. The industry provides over 1,200 high-paying jobs, generating over $104 million in economic activity. The administration really isn't protecting our tourism economy at all, are they?
No, they aren't.
We're really taking it on the chin in Arizona. Stifle economic development in our top recreation is overregulating vital aspects of the canyon tourism's economy and banning domestic energy production. The government just needs to get out of the way and let northern Arizona's economy thrive on its own. Buster, you're the chair of the Quad City local governments made up of counties from Arizona, California, Utah, and Nevada. How have ineffective Endangered Species Act recovery efforts for the desert tortoise negatively affected economic productivity on the BLM in your region?
What we have to do now, and a lot of people that are familiar with the tortoise will realize anytime you do a project that they think is in a tortoise area, you have to put tortoise fencing up, which is just this little crummy plastic orange fence that sits about that high. You bury it in the ground, and it costs you about $15,000 a mile on both sides to put it in, which doesn't really do anything, and then you have to tear it out of the ground because now the EPA says you're polluting the ground with doing these things. You're getting in the California area, some places in Nevada. It's starting to get Utah. It hasn't got to Arizona yet. We're trying to fight it. BLM is allowing solar to be put on their lands, thousands and thousands of acres, but they're requiring of the person putting the solar on for next to nothing to go out and buy 3 times the amount of private land and give it to the federal government, which takes it out of our tax rolls, which is just killing us. The military bases in California have been affected greatly because of the tortoise, so that when they're doing their training for all of our people that are going overseas, where all the lands they have, a lot of it is considered to be tortoise, it shut those down. And the thing I think that bothers me the most, and it's another one of these catch-22s that we're always talking about, is I've been involved in this for 16 years now in the tortoise, and we all want to save the tortoise. I mean, we all want to save the bald eagle. We're not so big about some of those fish, but you know, we'll save the big things. But there is nobody doing anything that has saved one tortoise. If a tortoise is taken out, and like the military bases in California, they raise the tortoise and keep them so the hatchlings. You're not allowed to put those back into the wild because they might bring a disease in, which actually helps go through the cycle and strengthens our tortoises. when you meet with all these different bureaucrats, they're just protecting their jobs. They want millions of dollars to do investigations, but never come up with an idea of how it will affect the tortoise. To this date, we have not one report that says by removing mining, by removing the ranchers, by removing off-roaders, that it has saved one tortoise life. And I guess that's what bothers us. We all want to do something positive. We all want to keep the earth green, but when it's just to keep people's jobs, it's frustrating.
Well, Supervisor Johnson, thanks for coming and thanks for being involved. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Next, Senator Risch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be brief. Mike and Chantell, thank you for what you're doing. There's a lot of people who wouldn't have the fortitude that you've had to do this. I mean, as the Supreme Court Justice said, this is just, it's unbelievable. It's just outrageous. This is something that happens in a third world country, not to people who are supposedly free, living under a constitution that gives us right. Mr. Schiff, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Dr. Fife, when I was governor, I tried to meet with every city in Idaho, large, small, medium. And that story that you told, it would be nice if we could say, gee, that's kind of a unique situation. Almost every small city in America has the exact same type of a story that you're telling, where the data is flawed, where the requirements are just totally unreasonable. And for all of you, I can tell you that it'd be nice if we could say these are unusual stories. Those of us who represent Western states hear these things every single day. Where's the common sense? It's gone. It's absolutely gone. When you hear these things about the EP and what they do, you wonder what can they possibly be thinking. They've lost their way. Everyone in America wants clean air and clean water. We all want it, we all demand it, and we can do that if we just act reasonably. But common sense has gone out the window, reason has gone out the window, and the result of that is they are really doing the objective a disservice because everybody's getting disgusted with it. And at the end of the day, it hurts what we're all trying to do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Pierce.
Thank you, and Senator Crapo would like to say thanks for pulling this group together. This has been a stunning array of stories that we've had in testimony that we've heard today, beginning with the Sacketts. I just came back from Vietnam. That is a communist country, and just recently a very high-profile case there. The government owns all of the land, but they let the people use it, and the government was going to take back a piece of land that an individual's family had had for generations. The nation came together and stood up to the government, stood behind the individual. He dug his heels in and said, I'm not leaving. And it sounds very much like what the Sacketts have done. And just about a week or so ago, the Prime Minister came out against the government on the side of the people. So if it can happen in a communist country, maybe we can find people here in this country that will actually start standing up against our government. Because the Sackett's case is repeated in New Mexico. We've got the Gosses who've been through decades of court hearings. Just this last summer, an additional court found against the government. And so during a drought, the government went in and fenced off all the water supplies that were supposed to be available to the rancher, and our office had to intervene in that. I was impressed by Dr. Fife's testimony. He's a PhD, a scientist, and he's there calling the EPA a bully. I appreciate that. I would note that when the Sacketts talk about the fear and we hear the word bully used, that it was Thomas Jefferson, that noted that when the government fears the people, we have liberty, and when the people fear the government, we have tyranny, and we're moving towards tyranny in this country, and we hear it day after day after day. Mr. Knight's testimony was very effective to that. Just Mr. Johnson's testimony about the withdrawal acts. We're allowing Congress to be bypassed by agencies. The Wilderness Act describes that only Congress can make the withdrawals, but we find with the roadless rules that the agencies are doing it. I'll just restrict myself to one question, Mr. Chairman, and when Mr. Schiff, when you got the EPA finally, they said there are no appeals. You can't come to us. You can't talk to us. We're somehow above the people. We as the agency of the EPA don't have to address everyday common people like the Sackett. So when you finally got them into court and you made your arguments, what did they say about why they about their actions regarding not just the Sacketts, but many people just like them? What did they say?
They have said that they can't be brought into court because if they have to answer for their actions, and that will preclude them from effectively protecting the environment and administering the Clean Water Act. So they're afraid of judicial review because they think that that will prevent them from asserting their power as they wish. And in that respect, they're absolutely correct. But I think that their sense as to what their mission is terribly misguided.
They're afraid of having anyone review because they know that people like Mr. Fife are going to show the inadequacy of the science that they're using, the processes that they're using. That's what they're afraid of. And it's time for all people to stand up. Again, just to close, we've had 3 massive demonstrations of people walking in the streets because I said, I don't think I can cure the problem in Washington. I don't think Washington will vote to stand up for your rights. So the roadless rule, almost 1,000 people showed up over there in Silver City, New Mexico. Endangered species, another 1,000 showed up in Roswell, New Mexico, saying you are not going to kill our jobs without us protesting. And then finally on the management of the forest. So we're just going to the people and saying that the people are the government here. So thank you all for your hard work, for your courage in standing up. Appreciate that, and I yield back.
Thank you. And Senator Moran.
Senator Crapo, thank you. It's good to see my former colleague, Mr. Pierce.
There we go.
Good to see my former colleague, Mr. Pierce, and I apologize my inability to be here earlier today, but I wanted to come and especially welcome my Kansas friend, Mr. Knight, for his being here, and I look forward to having a discussion with you this afternoon in our office. But I know a bit about your operation, and I wanted you to explain to my colleagues the cost of regulation, what it means to you and your operation, and particularly in light of the national agenda of trying to create jobs. Can you tell us anything about the burden of the regulatory burden and what its consequence is for creating jobs in Rice County, Kansas, for you to expand your operation, for you to hire more people? There's this, I hear it time and time again from Kansans about the regulations are killing us, and you come to Washington, D.C., and you're told, well, regulations don't have anything to do with stymieing the growth of the economy. I assume you have an opinion about that, Mark.
I do. I do have an opinion. I'll just go through, historically, just to start out in 96, that's the year we decided to expand the feed yard. And in doing so, and the reason we did is because our customer base was very good. We had when we still have great people. We have too many good people, so we expanded, right? And when we did that, I had the permits. Everything was fine with KDH&E. Everything was fine, and we built the lagoon like we should have. Compacted the sides, got the slopes, planted the grass. That was and this is big money to us. It's about $170,000 just to build that one lagoon, not including the pumping equipment and all that, but just the dirt work. 4 years later in 2000, they were out to visit again, and we were driving around, and I was told that, oh, by the way, you need to expand the lagoon that you have. It's not big enough. My comment was, I built it based on your specs. And the answer I got was, well, things change. You're going to have to do it again. So by dredging it out, it costs a lot of money. All I could tally up is around darn near $250,000 to clean it out, rebuild it, and get everything perfected like it was, not to mention the piping and the motors and everything else that it takes. After 40 years, this May will be our 40th year as night feed yard. And this year is, now they're wanting us to catch water runoff from our mill floor. That's predicted to cost around another couple $100,000. You see why, it's just, why put yourself through it? And we're going to, but it's just no fun. And you talk about common sense, I could go off the record and keep talking, but I won't. But anyway, yeah, the reporting, I've got one guy doing the watering, I got the same guy doing, he's got to figure out how much moisture we get all the time. I used to do it all by myself, and it got too burdensome. So anyway, there's a total of 3 of us now that are watching the regulatory stuff that we have to do. Good question.
Mark, thank you. Just for my colleagues to know that the Knight family is just such a solid, substantial component of the Kansas economy and agriculture, and just the kind of people who would never do anything intentionally other than to do it right. And I regret that so many people come to Washington, D.C. to try to make certain that they're able to stay in business and to expand and to do the things they want to do with their lives, to pursue the American dream in a sense. And you spend your time trying to fight your own government just so you can do what is in yours and your family's best interest. I appreciate all of you coming to take time to tell us the story, and I would offer my services to my colleagues to make sure that we take the right steps to try to resolve some of these things favorably. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Moran. Representative Labrador.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for convening this panel. Just want to tell you, Dr. Fife, that I've spent some time in Brigham City. It's one of my favorite places. I have a good friend from there. I went to BYU, and I would go visit my friend at Brigham City quite often. So it's one of my favorite cities. And my son went to Utah State. Even though I'm a Cougar, I've had to become an Aggie. So anyway, just Chantell and Mike, thank you for being here again. I know you've made a lot of treks out here. And I just want to ask you one simple question. You've gone through this now for a long period of time, and I assume that you wanted to have some property on Priest Lake because you want to have clean air and clean water. Is that a good assumption on my part?
Yes.
Can you explain that? I know it sounds like a ridiculous question, but the President of the United States just said that Republicans want dirty air and dirty water. He just said that just a couple of weeks ago. So can you explain?
Well, I think it would go back to when the first time I was experienced Priest Lake very young. I was 14. And by the time I was a junior in high school and had my own driver's license, that's where I always went. And I decided then that I was going to figure out how to live at Priest Lake. And, you can walk out on anyone's dock on that lake and you can see the bottom of the lake. It's something that we cherish. It's something that pulled us to Priest Lake. And we want that lake to be for generations to be like it is. And there would be no reason for us to ever not want it that way.
And on an economic analysis, even if you didn't care about the environment, what would it do to your property if the water and the air was dirty in that area?
It would devalue it for sure, and you wouldn't want to be there.
Okay. So can you tell us, you've thought about this now long and hard, what can we do at the federal level to make sure that this doesn't happen to you or to any American ever again?
Well, as you know, this fight is Chantell's and my fight, but it has got a lot bigger than that. Mm-hmm. And if we can do anything with your help, is to make sure that the EPA never walks into some family's life and do what they've done to us. And I believe that Congress is going to have to make those decisions to get the EPA to where they don't have that kind of basically no accountability. I mean, nobody's regulating them at that level. So we need your help to rein in the EPA, so they can't just walk into people's lives. And you don't get your day in court.
Excellent. Again, thank you for everything you've done.
Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions right now. I wanted to put up a couple of pictures. Can we put the first picture up? This one. Chantell and Mike, this is, I believe, a picture of your property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
This is what the EPA says is a wetland. Now, is this because the EPA has some bigger regional map that covers this area, or how did they decide this was a wetland, you know?
Well, they told us that our property was in a wetland inventory. And when they first told us that, I had no idea what that was. So they gave us the coordinates to our property, and they said, you can go find it on the map. So we did that. It took me a while. It's a new thing that I had to kind of get myself through. And I had some help with one of our employees. Mm-hmm. But when we figured out what the coordinates were, our property wasn't in the inventory. It was around it, or the inventory was around our property. Our property wasn't on their wetlands.
So it wasn't even actually in an EPA inventory?
No, it wasn't. And when I told them that, they said, well, that's not always correct.
And I suppose you told them that there wasn't any standing water on the property also. Let's go to the second picture. And I know you made this point in your testimony, Mike, but this picture shows that this is a developed or a platted subdivision. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The subdivision was built in the early 80s, and that hopefully someday will be our neighbor.
I hope so too. And tell me again, there aren't just houses next to you, but there are roads built.
Yeah, that is correct. You are looking right to the east at that right now at that picture, and to the north and to the south would be towards the lake. There's county roads on both sides.
All right, and again, no standing water on the property of any kind.
No.
Let's just put up the last picture, and this is the one where this is your property also, correct? Or is that nearby?
No, that's we're walking on our property.
You're walking on your property here.
Yeah.
Well, my hope is that the houses we saw will be your neighbors soon, and that you'll be sitting on a porch there or whatever it is that you are able to build there. And I just want to tell you that to me, it's part of the American dream to be able to find a place where you want to live and build a life there. And to see the EPA stepping in with such outrageous conduct and then not even allowing for accountability is something that has caught the vision of many, many people in America, and I commend you for standing up and fighting back. And I know that our whole delegation in Idaho will support you in this. We've been joined by Senator Lee, and if you care to ask any questions, Senator Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, to the Sacketts, I'd like to say hello once again. We met a few months ago, and after listening to your testimony a few months ago over in the Russell Building, Senator Rand Paul decided to introduce legislation, which I'm proud to co-sponsor, clarifying the term navigable waters, following the interpretation of that term used by Justice Scalia in his opinion in the Rapanos case several years ago, which I think would help clear that up substantially. A picture really does speak 1,000 words, and to call that a navigable water or to call it a wetland is quite interesting. As a fellow Westerner, I know what dry land looks like, and that's it. Mayor Fife, I wanted to just ask you a question or two about how your city and its economy have been affected by the EPA's non-attainment finding.
We talked a little bit about that, Senator Lee, that it's very difficult to, I mentioned the example of the Procter & Gamble, and speaking to them, they came in just before we were designated as a non-attainment, and I spoke to them and asked them how that would have affected their decision from the person that helped in the site management. And he said it would have been a major decision maker in determining whether they wanted to come. We're trying to actively recruit. We've got a couple of great projects we're recruiting now, and it has become an issue that we are considered a non-attainment area for air quality. So companies look at that as they try to relocate. They want an environment that's good for their employees as well as their company as well. So it's a major issue.
And I suppose, Mayor Fife, that the difficulty of it is compounded even further by the fact that there's something of a moving target when it comes to the data that are utilized in the determination as to whether or not you're in a non-attainment zone. Is that right?
Absolutely. And the state recommended that we not be a non-attainment area. They told the EPA that their model was flawed, and they didn't listen to the state. And then we did further analysis and showed them that their data was incorrect. But we actually just got a ruling from the court case that was filed this last Friday that in favor of the EPA. It's very hard to convince the court that it's arbitrary and capricious, but also they said that they didn't have to show how much was contributed. It just had to be specified that there was a contribution. So if they could show that one car commuted from Box Elder County and Brigham City to the Salt Lake area, that was sufficient for the court to say that we contributed to the pollution in Salt Lake area.
Yes, and that's a high standard to meet, isn't it? Having to show that a particular policy, a rule basically carrying the force of generally applicable law, a federal law, a statute for all intents and purposes, is arbitrary and capricious. It's such a profound difference because when you want to get a change in law passed through the traditional route, through the route called for by the Constitution, you have to take that change in law through the House of Representatives, and you have to take it through the United States Senate, and then you have to present it to the President. And unless you get it past all three of those entities, you get no change in law. But on the other hand, when it's a federal agency acting within what some refer to as our fourth branch of government, what others refer to as just part of the executive branch of government, they can just make the change of law, notwithstanding the fact that not one of them is a senator, not one of them is a representative or the president, not one of them has ever stood for any election, not one of them serves in their current job subject to re-election. And as a result, your only recourse is to take them to court and to prove that what they've done is arbitrary and capricious or outside their statutory authority, which is a very, very high hurdle to satisfy. And I see this all over our state. I see it all over the West, this problem of lawmaking by executive fiat. There was a very good reason why our founding fathers 224, almost 225 years ago, sat down and they said, the lawmaking power is a quintessential component of what it means to be a government. And we're going to entrust that power only to those who are elected and who will stand for re-election at regular intervals. We've got a problem with that. I'm fighting every day to try to overcome that. One of the solutions, I think, has to involve something called the REINS Act, R-E-I-N-S. It's a legislative proposal introduced in both houses of Congress that says anytime you have a federal regulation, a rule carrying the force of generally applicable law, introduced by an executive branch agency, that won't take effect, assuming it's a major rule for purposes of the OMB standards, unless or until both houses of Congress have enacted it into law and submitted it to the President for his signature or ratification. I think that would solve a lot of the problems that we have here today, and I look forward to the day when Brigham City and other communities like it no longer have to suffer the indignity and indeed the tyranny of lawmaking by people who are neither elected by the people nor accountable to anyone who is elected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Lee and Representative Pierce. This will bring us to the conclusion of our hearing. Yes, did you want to say something?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I noticed you had a visual aid up, and I noticed my senior senator from Arizona wasn't here, and he does better with pictures. And I wondered if I might be able to submit a picture so that he would be able to follow through. I could show you. They have a copy of Brian would give it to you. I have a larger copy too.
Okay. And you definitely can submit that.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll make sure that your senior senator gets it.
It's basically, we are all aware of the White House's innovative use of powerful czars and their non-legislative impacts on our work and economic recovery. My turf, Mojave County, Arizona, has been on the receiving end of detrimental use of power by the Obama administration's biggest job-killing czar, the Salazar. Now, I brought an unbiased graphic visual aid with me to help explain what we were up against. The carpetbagging cowboy on the right here depicts Interior's Secretary Salazar, who has just killed off my county's efforts to garner investment and jobs while assisting in the quest of America's energy independence. While the handsome miner on the left mourns the death of his faithful burro and any future for the mining industry, the mighty hunter Salazar glorifies in his recent string of kills. The Interior Secretary surely believes he is protecting the northwest Arizona environment by taking prime uranium mining land out of action, unfortunately at a time when the country needs jobs, business growth, and expensive energy. Salazar rightfully calls the Grand Canyon area a priceless American landscape. The physical impact of mining efforts on the more than 1 million acres now off limits would be negligible, and remedial of expended mining law is currently mandated. On the other hand, I wonder what the Grand Canyon would look like if it was filled with Obama energy mirrors and propellers. You will notice the great hunter is also carrying the recently bagged Canadian Keystone Goose. The Keystone XL pipeline project would have created thousands of jobs during construction, would have brought 500 million barrels of oil per day from our close northern ally to American refineries. And once again, the current administration is killing all hopes of eventual energy independence from the world's totalitarian oil-producing country. And those of you familiar with the desert tortoise know the negative impact it has had on our economy and military bases. I just appreciate that.
Now, are you the artist?
No, one of my employees is the artist.
Well, thank you, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate that. And in conclusion, let me just indicate my thanks to Representative Pierce and Senator Barrasso for their leadership in the Congressional and the Senate Western caucuses because of the specific types of issues that you have each brought before us today. We have two very strong caucuses that have grown up in the House and in the Senate who are committed to finding solutions. And some of the solutions that we've identified that we need to focus on are in this booklet, the Western Caucus Jobs Frontier booklet, that you may be of interest to, and we can certainly make that available. I think the RAINS Act is one of the provisions that's in here. If not, it should be. And a number of other proposals that we've identified as solutions to push back and to try to correct the problems that we are facing. We look to you for helping us to develop not only the agenda that our caucuses will pursue, but also to help us promote a better understanding across the country of the need for these kinds of reforms. And your being here today with us has been very instrumental in that regard, whether it's individuals like the Sacketts or the Knights, or whether it's a city or a county, or someone who's working with an association or a foundation in this case that's committed to finding solutions. People around the country are starting to recognize the incredibly broad reach of the overreach of the federal agencies. And I believe that we're going to have increasing success as we move forward here in our efforts with the caucuses to find solutions and to correct these wrongs. Again, I want to thank you all for taking the time and making the effort to be with us today. And with that, unless there's anything else, this hearing will be adjourned.